Order, order. David Johnson to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Mrs McDonagh. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I, in some ways, wish this debate wasn't necessary about the performance of Royal Mail, and I want to be crystal clear right at the outset that the problems I'm going to describe I don't think are the fault of Royal Mail's workers. I live in the Didcot area. I've experienced some of these problems, not nearly as badly as some of my constituents have. But I've also seen how hard they've all been working in my area and right the way across the constituency. And indeed, my constituents, when they complain to me, often say the same. They don't blame Royal Mail's workers, and they have huge admiration for them. But I've had more complaints about Royal Mail than any other company in my time as an MP, more than any other organisation in my time as an MP. And so I did think it was important to have this debate today, because my constituents have been complaining since the 10th of August. That was when I got my first complaint, the 10th of August 2020. My most recent complaint was Monday, just gone. And during that time, they've complained about all sorts of posts not arriving. I'll give some examples in a minute to illustrate the problem. And I think it's right that we take that seriously, because it's caused great distress, what they've been experiencing. And I naively hoped that when I called a meeting with Royal Mail HQ towards the end of last year, that would resolve it. I had no idea how widespread the problem was and how many areas of the country are affected, albeit it's not all areas of the country that are affected. Now, to give a sense of what's been happening, I mean, the complaints in my constituency have been concentrated in the Didcot area, the Wantage and Grove area, some of the surrounding villages of Wantage. There have been bits in Cholsey and Wallingford too. And that very first complaint I got on the 10th of August from a man called Sean, who lives in Didcot. And he wrote to me because he has a 2-year-old son who's deaf. And he relies on the post because he regularly needs moulds that hold the hearing aids for his 2-year-old son. His family also have a series of hospital appointments that they need to attend. And he's found himself in the situation both of missing hospital appointments because the letter didn't arrive on time, but he's also turned up at the hospital for appointments that weren't happening because he didn't get the cancellation letter on time. So we can understand how distressing this is, and it's having a knock-on effect on services like the NHS. My constituent Anne, who lives in Wantage, her and her husband didn't get their 65th wedding anniversary cards. And I've said it in the House before, if you get to 65 years of marriage, you ought to be getting your anniversary cards on time. And much more sadly, my constituent Matthew, his wife sadly died last year, and he didn't receive the condolence cards. He didn't receive the death certificates on time. I have constituents who've not had their insurance renewals, meaning they've ended up having to pay more for their insurance. I had one who didn't get his bank card and so couldn't pay for anything when he was out and about, and he had to go online each time in order to be able to do it. There are constituents complaining they're not receiving mail for 1 week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Sometimes they turn up at the sorting office and they're handed the mail of 2 and 3 weeks. One of my most recent complainants still hasn't had her Christmas post. Now, what's quite common in a situation like that is for constituents to downplay it, to say, well, I suppose it's only trivial, you know, I haven't had my Christmas cards, I haven't had this, I suppose it's only trivial. I don't think it's trivial at all. We will all appreciate the importance of medical appointments, but actually things like magazine subscriptions really matter. They really bring joy to people, and cards are hugely important to mark occasions. I've had a whole range of constituents who haven't had birthday cards arrive, often for really quite significant birthdays. Now, this clearly isn't happening in all areas of the country. But Royal Mail's official figures that they recently published say that on their first-class delivery target, which is 93%, they actually hit 74.7%. And in the figures I've looked at, that's the lowest for some considerable time. Now, of course, COVID is part of that. I don't think it's only COVID. I'll come on to what Royal Mail, because I've given them a right of reply, I'll come on to what they feel are the problems. But Royal Mail's national complaint figures also show a huge spike in complaints as well. And the reason I don't think it's just COVID is that when you look at the data, they haven't hit that first-class delivery figure in 6 of the last 10 years. They haven't hit their delivery completion target in 9 of the last 10 years. And even on something like special delivery, and I'm sure we've all been there at the post office where you get the talk from the person behind the counter saying, well, you know, if you really want it to get there on time, if you really want to make sure it's there, you should go special delivery. Of course, it's a lot more expensive. They've not hit that target at all in the last 10 years. Well, admittedly, that's a much higher target for them to hit. So they do hit a very high proportion of that. What I think is particularly frustrating about the experience in the last year is that Royal Mail's just recorded record profits. And I was surprised. I don't think I was eating cornflakes that I could choke on at the time, but I was surprised to open the paper and see the headline, Royal Mail profits treble. And of course, in terms of prices, the price of a first-class stamp has gone up a third in the last 5 years. It's gone up 12% just this year. So these two things, the fall in service with the increase in Royal Mail's profits, are you know, a difficult thing to reconcile. Now, I don't work for Royal Mail, so I can't say, you know, this is what the problem is. But I do think that part of the problem is to do with their prioritising parcels. Now, when I met with them last year, they said to me, we've gone from being a letter service that delivers parcels to a parcel service that delivers letters. And they said that if I'd been able to visit their sorting office, I would see things like washing machines and big screen TVs being delivered. Now, that's a business decision for them. But it is frustrating for constituents who've reported to me that they've not had any mail for 2 or 3 weeks, but they've seen Royal Mail staff and vans going around delivering parcels, delivering much, much bigger items. And quite a number of them have spoken to their local postmen and women and been told by them, confidentially, off the record, that they have been told to prioritise parcels over other mail. So what I think we have to do here is try and work out what the problem is and try and make sure that Royal Mail deals with this and that we don't just write it off as being something to do with COVID. Now, what Royal Mail say, because I contacted them and the CWU to ask for their opinions on this, Royal Mail say the issue is a combination of COVID-related absences, of the social distancing requirements, meaning that they can't have as many people in their buildings. And it's also the increase in parcels. So there's been an increase in parcels of 32%, partly because everybody's at home sending each other stuff. Although I think that's also probably partly a Royal Mail business decision to try and develop that aspect of their work, and it's doubtless contributed in part to their profitability in the past year. So I think that cuts both ways. But I wanted to have this debate really because my constituents often feel fobbed off when they complain to Royal Mail directly. They feel they don't get something that answers the question. One constituent said to me, the response they got from Royal Mail amounts to, we're trying, but it's not our fault. And I think I wanted this debate so that, I could make sure that ministers are aware of what's going on and what my constituents' experience is here. I think that we need, in my constituency alone, I would like Royal Mail to review the operation and, potentially they need to invest some of these profits in the operation. Do we need more staff? Do we need bigger service centres if the issue of parcels is taking up too much space, so they've got to get them out? Do they need bigger delivery centres? But certainly I think we need to work out what it is that's going wrong there. I think we could have a simpler process for compensating constituents, perhaps automatic, because Royal Mail know when they're delivering something very late because they have to report on that figure. So they should know that these people ought to be automatically compensated. And I also think it's important that Ofcom doesn't just allow this to be written off as, well, it's COVID, don't worry about it. I understand why they have given dispensation to Royal Mail in this year to say, look, COVID's imposed particular burdens, so we're not going to hold you to that 93%. But my constituents would say, actually, some of them would say they had problems before COVID. So I don't think it's good enough just to write it off as being that. Because in the end, Royal Mail has a near monopoly on this type of post. Our constituents can't go anywhere else with it, really. They can with parcels, but they can't with the things that they've been experiencing. And again, I don't hold Royal Mail's workers responsible for this, but I do think Royal Mail HQ, with some pressure from both the government and Ofcom, really do need to provide the service that our constituents are paying an increasing amount for all the time.
The question is that this House has considered the performance of Royal Mail. Helen Hayes.
Thank you, Ms McDonough. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair today. I congratulate the Honourable Member for Wantage on securing this important debate. I want to start by paying tribute to postal workers up and down the country for all that they have done throughout the coronavirus pandemic. Postal workers have been on the front line. They've faced additional risks, and I know that the rate of coronavirus infection amongst postal workers has been significant. They've continued to provide vital delivery services, and more than that, they've been a vital source of human contact for many people who've been self-isolating whilst living alone, sometimes the only person able to flag concerns about the health and well-being of residents. We all owe our postal workers a huge debt of gratitude. It is worth noting how utterly inappropriate it was that while Royal Mail's frontline staff were continuing to deliver for the public, the then Chief Executive was spending the lockdown in Switzerland. I know that Royal Mail has undergone a change of leadership in recent months, and that is certainly very welcome. My constituents understand the severe difficulties presented by the pandemic for all our public services, and Royal Mail is no exception. They understood the suspension of the universal service obligation in order to enable Saturday deliveries to be paused. They even understood when deliveries in some areas were taking place every other day rather than daily. There is a great deal of goodwill towards and support for our postal workers. However, the problems experienced in parts of my constituency have at times dropped well below even a basic level of reliability. And it's this issue and the significant problems that I've encountered with the monitoring and regulation of Royal Mail, which I'd like to focus on today. I'll focus today on the severe problems in the SE22 area of my constituency. While there have also been periods of significant problems in SE19 and SE27, my understanding is that these have been primarily due to sickness absence linked to the pandemic and were relatively quickly resolved. The problems in SE22 run much deeper than this. In 2017, Royal Mail announced its intention to close the SE22 delivery office, which serves East Dulwich, part of Dulwich Village and part of Peckham Rye, and merge it with the SE15 delivery office in Peckham. The local community protested against this plan, stating concerns that the SE15 office was difficult to access, very remote from some parts of SE22, that it would be difficult for postal workers to complete their rounds because of the long distances and hilly nature of the routes between SE15 and parts of SE22. Royal Mail pressed ahead with this merger anyway, just before the peak Christmas period in 2018, leading to a disastrous level of service at that time and chaos for many months afterwards. All the warning signs were there that Royal Mail's arrangements for deliveries to SE22 lacked the resilience to cope with challenging circumstances. At the start of the pandemic, delivery services in SE22 became completely unreliable, with residents on many different streets across the postcode area reporting that they weren't receiving mail on a regular basis, sometimes for weeks at a time. This was a completely different scenario to pausing Saturday deliveries or even delivering only on alternate days, which residents would have understood completely. The consequences for my constituents went way beyond inconvenience, though there was certainly plenty of inconvenience. The problems caused deep distress. Older people living in isolation who didn't receive birthday cards and gifts. legal documents going missing, hospital appointments missed, hospital appointments which had been cancelled due to the pandemic still being attended because the cancellation had not been received, death certificates going missing, and one constituent who had to attend court because she'd not received a speeding fine in time to be able to pay it. I've raised these issues with Royal Mail on behalf of every constituent who's been in touch with me. I've met with Royal Mail on many occasions to seek answers, and I visited the SE15 delivery office. It has been enormously frustrating that although Royal Mail have responded to each individual query, they have never accepted the extent of problems with their service in SE22 or the impact they've had on my constituents. I have taken this matter to Ofcom, who also seemed powerless to intervene, largely due to the suspension of the universal service obligation. I hope the Minister will understand that there is a huge difference between pausing Saturday deliveries or delivering every other day and not providing any deliveries at all for weeks at a time. And the accountability framework for a regulated service really should be able to account for that. I've pieced together some of the problems and the action that Royal Mail could have been compelled to take if there had been more regulatory intervention. The first is not to have closed the SE22 delivery office in the first place, or to have been obliged to re-provide it in a more convenient location for SE22. There is currently no requirement for public consultation on the closure of delivery offices, and the requirement for the geographical coverage of delivery offices is too wide to protect an area like SE22 from disastrous commercial decisions, and I would argue too wide really to be workable for an urban area like London. Once the severe problems became apparent last year, Royal Mail could have been required to explore temporary premises to alleviate the problems in the SE15 office, which were in part due to social distancing requirements, but they were not obliged to do so. It is also clear that over-reliance on vehicle sharing was a large part of the problem in SE22. Parts of SE22 are just too far away from the current delivery office to enable postal workers to set off by foot and complete their round within their shift. Coronavirus meant that van sharing was no longer safe, but there was no requirement for Royal Mail to address this, as they did much later to good effect by acquiring additional vehicles, apparently leaving large parts of SE22 unreachable for weeks at a time. It is also clear that staff sickness was a significant problem, as it was across many frontline services. But again, there appeared to be no requirement on Royal Mail to take on additional staff to cover, despite the fact that they were responsible for a regulated service. Finally, I want to flag immense problems with monitoring and accountability. Royal Mail have refused to provide me with performance data for the SE22 delivery office, despite problems over many months. This means that it's impossible to compare the experiences of my constituents against Royal Mail's actual performance. The information provided by Royal Mail has often been far too broad to be properly transparent or useful. Royal Mail only publishes performance data at the level of South East London. That's a huge area, and it entirely masks variation in performance within individual postcode districts. I know that Royal Mail has been through a very challenging time in recent years due to competition from private delivery companies, but their fortunes have significantly improved during the pandemic, and they recently recorded record profits. As things currently stand, they won't be compelled to spend any of their profits investing to deliver effective, reliable services for my constituents in SE22. Royal Mail provides a regulated service, which is absolutely vital for residents and businesses across the country, and it is important that they are effectively regulated. I ask the Minister today to look again at the regulatory framework for Royal Mail, to introduce a requirement for meaningful public consultation on proposals to close or move delivery offices, to tighten the rules on the geographical coverage of delivery offices in urban areas, and to introduce new performance data requirements to enable Royal Mail to be held to account in a meaningful way at the level of individual postcode districts.
Thank you. Catherine West.
Thank you, Ms McDonough, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship and also to contribute to this debate, which the member for Wantage was so effective in securing, and also to follow my excellent colleague, the member for Dulwich West Norwood. And I, like her, have carried out a number of visits to staff in the delivery and sorting offices in my constituency, and have enormous respect and gratitude for all the work that's been done, particularly during COVID, by staff by managers and by the Royal Mail to keep things going. However, there are a number of concerns which I too have received correspondence about. I've had 130 constituents write to me reporting issues, particularly around the second and third waves in winter of 2020 to 2021, particularly in the N4 and N8 postcode areas. And in the same manner in which we've heard this afternoon in the debate, there have been a number of discrepancies which cannot fully be accounted for just from the pandemic. So, for example, we've seen that the letter and parcel delivery supporting people who were shielding often fell short of what we would have expected. That the delivery of invitation letters to the first few cohorts of people eligible for the vaccine was also reliant on the postal service, and that sometimes failed. And of course, this highlights why the deterioration in services experienced in our constituencies is so frustrating, painful, and potentially dangerous for residents. My constituents have reported severe consequences resulting from the deterioration in the Royal Mail services. For example, receiving fees for late payment of utilities bills because they had not received the original letter bills, being fined for non-payment of penalty charge notices when they had not yet received the original letter informing them of the PCN being issued, late receipt of personal identity, medical and legal documents having an impact on constituents' ability to submit in-time applications, for example, self-assessed tax registration or sooner access to medical treatment, passport renewal services, legal appeals, delayed receipt of consumer goods and gifts, which was particularly upsetting around Christmas time when we were separated from family members, anxiety about financial security because of newly issued credit and debit cards which went missing in the post. So I do hope that this can be rectified, and I would be very grateful if the Minister, in his summing up, could please assist me and my constituents, because the delivery office, which was opposite Hornsey railway station, which was closed during the coalition years, there's been an ongoing campaign led by myself and local ward councillors to have that reopened. Now, the building is no longer available, but somewhere locally there must be, and I know that there are a number of empty shops on the Hornsey High Street which could be perfectly appropriate for a delivery office to be reopened. It's much more efficient from an energy point of view to have people popping into a delivery office than having endless parcel vans coming to people's doors. Now that the finances of the Royal Mail have improved and that there are record-breaking profits, which I believe have trebled, I would like to press the Minister for increased numbers of apprentices and staff to be taken on and paid competitive rates so that we can make good on what has been a pretty dismal record in the last 15 months. I would also like to see increased training and support for staff, and of course on weekends to increase the numbers of people delivering. We still have a youth unemployment problem in Hornsey and Wood Green, and I would like to see young people having job opportunities in the Royal Mail, which is a good employer normally, and I hope that this will be grabbed with both hands by management. Could I therefore conclude the debate simply by reminding the Minister that I would like to have a specific request from my constituency, given that it has been particularly badly affected by this situation, to have the return of a delivery office in the N8 area so that the Royal Mail can make good on its commitment and its obligations. And I would also be very pleased to hear what further action can be taken by MPs and our staff when things do go wrong, because I am very concerned that our regulatory framework seems to mismatch what is quite a desperate situation for many of our constituents. Thank you very much, Ms McDonough.
Thank you. I call Stephen Flynn the SNP spokesperson.
Thank you very much, Ms McDonough. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair, and I would like to pay tribute to the member for Wantage for securing this important debate. And I think he he certainly got his points across to the Minister, and I certainly hope that the Minister will respond to them in full. Indeed, the points raised by all three speakers up till now have been clear and substantive, and I think that they have outlined the concerns that they and their constituents most definitely have in relation to the performance of Royal Mail itself. Now, I was having a discussion last night with a colleague in and around the Royal Mail, and it's not often that as a nationalist we talk about British institutions and ones that are perhaps more favourable in our eyes. And of course, in that regard, the Royal Mail it's something which, to the public, it was loved, and it has been loved for many, many decades, if not centuries, in its previous guises. I think we actually compared it to Concorde in terms of probably being the only two things in British institutions that were perhaps favourable of. And I think that's probably the only time the Royal Mail has been compared to Concorde. But the point remains, and the wider point was that it is an institution which I think across the UK we all hold in extremely high regard. But of course that high regard, the government betrayed that in 2013 when of course it sought to privatise Royal Mail, a disgraceful decision, one which has not, to the best of my knowledge, been mentioned in the debate so far today, which I think is remiss, because of course that is in many ways, shape and forms, could perhaps be the root of some of the problems that we're seeing in terms of the ability for us as members of Parliament, and indeed for the public to influence the direction of Royal Mail in terms of what its priorities are. Because as we can see and as we have heard, the Royal Mail's performance when it comes to meeting its targets in terms of first-class deliveries, in terms of second-class deliveries as well, if I recall correctly, they've not been up to scratch. Now, of course, the pandemic has obviously played a role within that, but they weren't meeting the targets in the years prior to that either. They were close to meeting those targets, but they did not indeed meet those targets. And we've heard the consequences of that from the three previous speakers in terms of the impact that's had upon individual constituents. And indeed, I've been contacted by constituents as well, as I'm sure all members have been, in relation to items that have not been delivered, which were absolutely essential. And obviously on the converse, whilst we've seen Royal Mail struggle in that regard, we've got the complete converse situation where their profits are record high. I believe the figure is a £762 million pre-tax profit. That is remarkable, absolutely remarkable. And the member for Wantage was absolutely right to highlight that in terms of what is Royal Mail's priority at this moment in time, and if it is indeed parcels, then they should be clear about that and they should be open and transparent about that. And then it would be for the public to determine whether that's a suitable priority for the organisation to have. Again, like at risk of repeating myself, I think it would be more beneficial if of course, this place had more of a say in that. Of course, does not because of decisions that were taken in previous years, but we are where we are. Now, with your indulgence, Ms McDonagh, because I believe that the issues that have been highlighted are pertinent, I think it would be remiss of me as well, as a local member in Aberdeen, and of course very cognisant of the fact that the Royal Mail and the Post Office are separate, although the government does indeed have some control in relation to the Post Office, to not reflect upon the fact that in Aberdeen Post Office counters are again being closed in Torry and in Kincorth in my constituency, which is deeply, deeply frustrating, and will leave those communities behind to the detriment of the people who live there, much to the detriment of the constituents that we've heard from across the UK in relation to the performance of the Royal Mail, incidentally. Now, I will bring my remarks to a close in that regard, Ms McDonagh, because I am conscious of the fact that much of what can be said has already been said. But I do want to finish on an important point, and I think it was the member for Dulwich and West Norwood who stated it from the outset, is that we must pay tribute to the staff for the work that they have done over the course of this pandemic. I can't imagine how difficult it has been for them to manage the workload with taking into account social distancing, taking into account the own pressures that they will have felt, and of course taking into account the outbreaks that have undoubtedly happened within Royal Mail facilities, as they have everywhere else. So I would just like to place on record my thanks and my tribute to them, and I do indeed wish them well going forward. Thank you.
Chi Onwurah, opposition spokesperson.
Thank you, Ms McDonough, and it is a great pleasure to serve under your chairship. And I would like to start by congratulating the Honourable Member for Wantage on securing this very important debate. And it is the first time that I've actually spoken as Shadow Minister for Royal Mail, so I'd also like to pay tribute to my predecessor, the Member of Parliament for Sheffield Brightside and Hillsborough, for all her work on this very critical service. And as every member who's spoken has said, you know, the importance, every member who's spoken has emphasised the importance of the Royal Mail to communities and businesses across the UK, and seen most recently, and currently indeed, in the pandemic. And in the face of COVID-19, our local posties stepped up as key workers, keeping us connected, enabling small businesses to continue trading, and playing a vital public health role. The Royal Mail delivered and collected tens of millions of COVID-19 tests, distributed 1.5 billion items of PPE to our frontline workers, and delivered over 300 million vaccination letters. I want to thank the Royal Mail staff for their commitment during the pandemic, and reassure them that, as this debate has shown, it has not gone unrecognised. And I want to pay particular and special tribute, Ms McDonough, to the posties who, you know, despite having a higher rate of COVID as a consequence of the frontline work, their smile and cheery hello was for many the only real human contact they had during the darkest days of lockdown. Now, the Royal Mail traces its history back to 1516, when Henry VII introduced a Master of the Posts. Under state control, Royal Mail successfully established itself as a leading and innovative pioneer in postal services, achieving many global firsts, such as the first uniform postage rate in 1839, the creation of the world's first stamp in 1840, and my understanding is that is why the UK is the only country who just has, we have the Queen's head on the stamp, but we don't have the name of the country. And the introduction of first and second class letter services in 1968, and the launch of the UK's first digital stamp in 2004. Today it connects over 30 million addresses across the UK, employing over 160,000 staff. However, in 2014, the Tory-led coalition chose to privatise the postal service, a mistake that it is estimated to have lost the taxpayer £1 billion, according to the Bayes Select Committee. Labour fought against this, arguing that privatisation would prioritise profits over services. Unfortunately, this has become a reality, which is why Labour remains committed to supporting the public ownership of Royal Mail. Now, as many have pointed out, Royal Mail recorded record profits. The newly appointed CEO takes home £525,000 per year. But consumers and workers have paid the price with rising costs, longer delivery times and job losses. And the last year alone has seen 2 above-inflation increases to stamp prices. In January, as the Honourable Member for Wantage pointed out, first-class stamps increased by 12% to 85 pence. Whilst various operational changes, such as online stamp printing, the reduction of opening times, and the closure of sorting offices, which has been discussed, saw 12,000 jobs lost by 2017. This is in addition to 2,000 managerial roles which were lost as a result of restructuring during the pandemic. Ms McDonough, I'm also the Shadow Minister for Digital, and I know all too well the impact of digital exclusion on the UK and how the Royal Mail allows many excluded communities to remain connected. But between 2013 and 2017, the closure of 75 delivery offices disproportionately impacted those who rely on them the most, as the Honourable Member for Hornsey and Wood Green emphasised. As delivery officers play the important role of ensuring undelivered mail can be conveniently collected by the recipient, their closure often causes avoidable stress for individuals who are forced to travel further and owners whose businesses require the frequent collection of parcels, as pointed out by the Honourable Member for Dulwich and West Norwood. And Ms McDonough, workers have also been collateral damage in the Royal Mail's mission to maximise profits. In 2018, after months of disputes between Royal Mail and the Communication Workers Union, a package covering pay, pension and working conditions was agreed to. Despite union members voting overwhelmingly in favour of the deal, Royal Mail abandoned the agreement in 2019, leading to the biggest vote for national industrial action since the passing of the Trade Union Act in 2016. The Communications Workers Union have worked hard to reach a new agreement, but I would like to ask the Minister what steps he is taking to ensure Royal Mail management have a better grasp of effective industrial relations and support good jobs, and as emphasised by the member for Hornsey and Wood Green. Now, Ms McDonough, Royal Mail is the UK's sole designated universal service provider, which is both which is an honour and a privilege, as well as ensuring that it is so important to our communities. And they remain the UK's largest postal operator. 75% of small and medium businesses surveyed by Ofcom cited Royal Mail as their main postal services provider in 2020. Now, while letter volumes declined by 25% during the pandemic, the demand for parcel delivery increased by 32% as consumer behaviour changed. And we heard from the member for Wantage anecdotal evidence of parcels being prioritised by Royal Mail. The UK parcel market is highly competitive. The Royal Mail continues to hold the largest share at 35%, but other providers such as Amazon and Hermes are on the rise. So I'd also like to ask the Minister what recent assessment he has made of competition in this market, and whether cross-subsidy, as prevalent, for example, with Amazon with regards to its retail sector, what impact that has, and also the impact of charge-free delivery as associated, for example, with Amazon Prime, which encourages parcels to be ordered and delivered individually, effectively, and what impact that has on the environment and our climate change commitments. Now, Ms McDonough, as we've heard, posties have worked tirelessly through the pandemic, but we've also heard disturbing details of the service disruption resulting, at least in part, from higher levels of sickness absence. In 2021, as we've heard, Royal Mail missed the 93% target for first-class mail being delivered the next working day by 8 percentage points. And members highlighted that behind that statistic there are patches, particular areas of very low performance, which has had unspeakable impacts on our constituents' lives, particularly highlighted by the members for Dulwich and West Norwich and Hornsey and Wood Green. So will the Minister, does the Minister think Royal Mail did all it could to inform people of service disruptions, and how can we better hold Royal Mail to account for the impact of that disruption? So Royal Mail were not penalised during this last year because of the pandemic, but in 2018-19, Ofcom fined Royal Mail £50 million for failing to reach first-class delivery targets. And as we have heard, they have consistently failed to meet targets, and particularly in relation to special delivery in the 3 years prior to the pandemic. So to improve their performance, Royal Mail have invested approximately £2 billion in modernising their operations since 2013, and that is to be welcomed. But despite this, Ofcom's analysis of Royal Mail efficiency in 2020 found that it failed to meet its own productivity targets. And Ofcom warned that unless Royal Mail modernised their network to ensure they serve rural and urban spaces equally, that the, and I quote, sustainability of the universal service could be at risk in the longer term. So can I ask the Minister what steps he's taking to ensure the universal service delivery requirements are fit for purpose in relation to changing markets and consumer needs, and particularly if, as Ofcom has appropriate powers to monitor and enforce it, as highlighted by members in this debate. And Mr. Donna, I would just, before I close, I'd also like to think it's worth mentioning the Horizon scandal. And this was the largest miscarriage of justice in our history, with over 900 false prosecutions, destroying lives, families and reputations. At the time that the Horizon service was commissioned in 1999, the Post Office and Royal Mail were still operating under the same ownership and management structure. So I do hope the Minister will confirm that Royal Mail are also learning the lessons of that scandal. Finally, postcodes, a subject the Minister and I have discussed by parliamentary question. In privatising Royal Mail, the government also privatised our postcodes, and on the cheap. Royal Mail charges for access to the postcode address file, even though much of the intellectual property comes from the local authorities who assign addresses. While the government's own national data strategy says that we will encourage data sharing, opening up data, and yet, this remains a significant barrier to communication, to location, and to innovation. So what steps will the Minister take to address this? To conclude, Ms McDonough, the Royal Mail is a UK institution of which we have been proud for hundreds of years, but I'm afraid that this government has failed to treat it with respect or care. Despite its importance to communities and the economy, the government are failing postal service users and communities, putting ideology above competence in its privatisation and now in its monitoring and accountability to maintain the quality of services. This is unfortunately a theme with this government. We have become all too familiar with the privatisation of profit and the socialisation of risk. Labour is committed to supporting a better postal service under public ownership.
Call the Minister, Paul Scully.
Thank you very much, Ms McDonough. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'd like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Wantage, for securing today's important debate about the performance of the Royal Mail. But first of all, can I just echo all of the thanks and the admiration of the important role that the post workers have played in serving customers and supporting local communities right across the UK, both now, in normal times, but clearly during this coronavirus pandemic. Their willingness to maintain deliveries, to do that day-to-day work for them at a time of increased social isolation, when many people couldn't leave their homes, is absolutely vital. The government's relied on their continued service to keep people connected across the country as well, delivering the letters and the parcels that are so important to everyday life and supporting the economy in these unprecedented times. The honourable member, my honourable friend, member for Wantage, talked about the importance of post, as did the honourable member, the lady from member for Hornsey and Wood Green, about whether it's cards, whether it's those life events of celebrations or commiserations and condolences, through to those most important issues around tax and insurance and hospital appointments. I hope that his constituents that celebrated their 61st wedding anniversary, and please do pass on my best wishes to them. I hope they did get their cards in the end, and obviously I suspect to get their 65th wedding anniversary they know how to practice patience and forgiveness, so I'm sure they were in good stead whilst they were waiting to get to that point. But I do want to just talk a little bit about the situation of the service and the context of where we are at the moment before I answer some of the points that were raised. Royal Mail has got well-established contingency plans to mitigate disruption to postal services, and that is, as we've heard, overseen by Ofcom, the independent regulator. And it is important to remember it's an independent regulator. I think that independence is really key to making sure that they keep Royal Mail on their toes and that it does its job as an effective regulator. Royal Mail's reassured government that it's been doing everything it can to maintain service levels during this period and continues to keep Ofcom informed. But as we have heard, there are still issues that need to be addressed, and we will continue to challenge Royal Mail, and I will expect Ofcom to be doing exactly that as well under the framework. But I'll talk a little bit more about the regulatory framework in a second in response to some of the questions that have been raised. The changes made to the Royal Mail's operations due to disruptions are an operational matter for Royal Mail, and it's therefore up to Ofcom to monitor those service levels in the first instance. In November 2020, Ofcom published its user needs review of postal services. And in that report, Ofcom noted that the majority of users are satisfied with the postal services that they receive from Royal Mail. For residential users, the overall satisfaction has remained over 80% in the last few years. And SME users, overall satisfaction with the quality of services they receive has also increased markedly since 2012. And I think this is the important thing when we talk about privatisation. I understand this ideological debate around privatisation, but at the time, it was good. The studies around postal services around the world in comparison was considered that the Royal Mail was 40% less efficient than other international equivalent examples. And so what we've seen, as the Honourable Lady, the member for Newcastle Central, has said, we've seen £2 billion invested since that time, and an extra £1.8 billion that's been promised for further investment. And in that time as well, since 2010, 8% of post was sorted by machine. At the time, mere 8%, compared to 85% at the time that's sorted by machine by leading EU operations. That's now 90%. Now, can you imagine in a situation, in a nationalised Royal Mail at this point in time, when they are competing for those funds that they need to be invested, compared to, in a time when they'll be competing against schools, against hospitals, against all of the other services that the public sector has to provide. And so that extra money that's come in for investment is clearly to be welcomed. But the regulatory conditions that require Royal Mail to deliver letters 6 days a week as part of that universal postal service also provides that Royal Mail isn't required to sustain those services without interruption, suspension or restriction in the event of an emergency. And Ofcom has acknowledged in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic that it is indeed an emergency. And so as such, the regulatory framework allows Royal Mail to modify its obligations. That includes the temporary reduction in the frequency of the delivery of letters that Royal Mail implemented for 6 weeks in 2020 without formal authorisation, because it considered it necessary to respond to the challenges faced in maintaining the postal services at the height of this pandemic. Ofcom published a statement on its website in April 2020 and a further statement in January of this year, clarifying that the regulatory framework supported Royal Mail's actions. Throughout the pandemic, Royal Mail has been transparent with the public about any changes to the services it provides. The information can be found on the Royal Mail website. Now, clearly, as we've heard about the digital deficit, there is always more that we can do to make sure information gets to people rather than people having to find information. And we'll always work on that. And I think it's incumbent on all of us, actually, as elected leaders in our communities, to make sure that if we can get the information to colleagues then across the House, then we can help amplify those messages to our constituents as well. So maybe these are areas that we can clearly look at. But it should therefore come as no surprise that when Royal Mail published its quality of service results last month, it hadn't met the universal service obligation targets for the delivery of first and second class mail. Royal Mail reported that was due to the high levels of COVID-related absences, including shielding, the introduction of social distancing, as we've heard in its operations, no shared vans, and the increase in parcel volumes. The parcel volumes went up an incredible 32%. And as has been said, we know that the service change in postal affairs over the last few years, that parcels are driving profits in amongst their competitors, and indeed that's one of the major contributing factor to the financial performance of the Royal Mail in recent months. So in light of all of those factors, Royal Mail acknowledges that at times its quality of service hasn't always been how it had been wished, especially in the areas where there were higher levels of local COVID infections. But despite that, clearly, postmen and women worked exceptionally hard to ensure that the delivery of COVID-19 test kits were prioritised. Royal Mail implemented Sunday deliveries and collections, resulting in next-day deliveries for COVID-19 test kits exceeding 98%. In addition, they prioritised the delivery of NHS vaccination letters and election mailing, doing its best to ensure that service delays didn't impact these important communications. But let me just quickly take some time to say something about my honourable friend's particular concerns about the delivery service across his constituency in Wantage. And I must admit that in the lead up to here, I did speak to my two-man focus group in Great Coxwell, my former parents-in-law, who said at the time in Great Coxwell that actually there were a few days in COVID, there were a few days behind, but in the general it's been okay, and now it's back to pre-COVID levels, which actually goes to show that even in a constituency, there are patches where things are seemingly okay, but there are clearly patches, as he's eloquently highlighted, that there are still significant issues that we need to tackle, and we can't look at one area in isolation, and that's he's right to therefore drill down into those areas. I've been informed by Royal Mail that the service in the Wantage area was disrupted due to sick absence levels in some parts of the operation there remaining higher than normal, and that was exacerbated by necessary changes to the business operations and difficulty with additional recruitment. There's 10 postcode areas in Wantage, and there's 10 delivery offices that service that. In the Wantage area itself, sick absences peaked at 15%. But I'm pleased to report that as of last week, that absence has gone down significantly and is currently at levels Royal Mail would expect at this particular time of year. To provide a snapshot of disrupted service levels and how far Royal Mail has come to improve those, let me just cover 3 quick areas in Wantage. So the Wantage delivery office, per day that would cover 29 delivery rounds. In December, on average, 7 delivery rounds couldn't be completed per day. In April, this was at most 1 delivery round per day. The Didcot delivery office, which my honourable friend mentioned, per day that covers 38 delivery rounds. In December, on average, 10 delivery rounds couldn't be fully completed per day. In April, this was at most 3 delivery rounds. And in the Wallingford delivery area, delivery office, that's 39 delivery rounds. In April, there was a high level of sick absence, and that did have an impact on mail deliveries clearly. And so mail deliveries took place rotationally every other day. But as of May, mail deliveries have been taking place 6 days a week to all addresses served by all 3 of those delivery offices. And in addition, Royal Mail continues to use agency support as well as hire vehicles to alleviate any pressure on staff, and so they can maintain the best possible service. At the Wantage, Didcot and Wallingford delivery offices, 14 permanent roles have been created, and to date 6 of those new recruits are in post. But clearly, in asking those questions, they've also assured me that if for any reason that an address doesn't receive a mail delivery one day, it will be a priority for the next working day. And they're open to engage with the public and indeed all MPs about delivery services in their respective constituencies. And across the UK, I enjoy going to my local delivery offices whenever I can in Sutton, but I'm pleased to hear that the honourable friend, my honourable friend is going to, I believe, a site visit tomorrow in Didcot. So I hope he finds that productive in following up this conversation and this discussion today, because it's important that we do scratch beneath the surfaces, and yes, we get the assurances, but it's only by going and seeing them with those further questions that I hope he will get the answers that he needs and puts his constituents' views, as I know he will, very admirably to the managers within that delivery office. The postmen and women that serve Wantage over and across the UK have continued to dedicate themselves to providing that key public service. Royal Mail more broadly has done its utmost to deliver on its universal service obligation while observing health and safety advice. But as I say, Royal Mail has been transparent in its changes to service, but it does acknowledge that there's been some disruptions to those deliveries. But as I've said, that mainly, but not solely as we've heard, due to the extenuating circumstances generated by the pandemic. But we've also seen consumer behaviour. We've seen the rise in online shopping. Royal Mail's financial report that was published last month highlighted that parcels represented 72% of its UK revenue in the previous financial year, increasing from 63% in the financial year 2019 to 20. And that's largely been driven by changes in behaviour through the pandemic. Increases in e-commerce have further added to the demand for parcel delivery services. A study by Royal Mail found there was a 7% increase in company start-ups in March to July 2020 compared to the same period in 2019. Of 315,000 new companies, nearly 16,000 were e-commerce. And so the pandemic is an emergency situation that has required Royal Mail to be flexible, making necessary adjustments and respond effectively to demand. And so Royal Mail have clearly done its best to maintain service levels during a situation outside its control. But that's why the regulatory framework provides that flexibility to manage emergency situations, and why Ofcom indicated its support for the measures Royal Mail has taken to respond. But Ofcom also noted that it didn't meet its quality of service standards in 2020, but the performance has improved considerably in recent months as COVID impacts have started to recede. And Ofcom considers that timings for return to pre-COVID performance standards are likely to align with further guidance on social distancing. Indeed, I spoke to the Chief Executive of Ofcom about this just yesterday. And Ofcom have reassured me that it continues to scrutinise performance closely, and that Royal Mail is actively implementing a recovery plan that includes operational changes and the use of additional frontline staff. Now, the Ofcom clearly needs to ensure that postal regulation keeps pace with changes in the market and remains relevant. I think this is a point that the Honourable Member for Dulwich and Norwood raised, looking at the future regulation and framework. We last reviewed the regulatory framework for post in 2017, and at that time said it should remain in place until 2022. Therefore, Ofcom is now carrying out the review of future regulatory framework for the post, which it aims to complete in 2022. And as part of that review, Ofcom will consider whether extra consumer protections may be required, and is seeking views on the future regulation of the parcels market. A call for inputs closed in May 2021. Ofcom will publish a full consultation on the future regulation of postal services later this year. I've talked about the Honourable Lady, the member for Newcastle Central, talked about postcode data, and this is something indeed we've spoken about, and it's a really interesting point that we need to consider to work on, because in the era of open data, we've got to make sure that, as I say, that open data is available without one company seeking to profit from IP that's been developed over a period of time. So I'm looking forward to continuing the discussion with her on that. In terms of the member for Hornsey and Wood Green, she raised, as she has indeed before, about the issues around the N8 area, and I know that the Royal Mail were clear. They avidly. Well, I was going to say they avidly read Hansard. I was going to say that's a little bit much for the rest of the time. But I guess it's essential lockdown reading. But clearly, I know they do. They look at the coverage in this place and the debates in this house. And so they will have heard the Honourable Lady, the Honourable Member, about the campaign that she's been running to make sure that her constituents are well served in the N8 area and the surrounding area as well. And indeed, we've spoken, had a debate led by the Honourable Member for Dulwich and Norwood about the SE22 area. I think it was November 2020 that we last spoke about that, and it's interesting to hear the update about exactly what is happening in that area with her constituents. So I know she will continue to lobby and campaign on behalf of our constituents to make sure that they can get the service that they deserve. We know that the Royal Mail needs to continue to modernise as people are moving towards the parcels. We cannot forget those essential letters, that essential correspondence that although yes, fewer people are relying on, those people that are relying on it are the most vulnerable in society in many cases, and the most dependent on that social contact, that social value, as well as essential services that are provided still by post. Clearly, delays in postal service deliveries can be frustrating. They can have really serious, real consequences, and we've heard some examples for those that are relying on the post for important information, and for start-up and small businesses as well, who are trying to build their businesses and develop a reliable remote offer to their customers. And indeed, from last week, a debate that we had here, I don't doubt the issues in the Highlands and other remote areas about the particular issues that they have about the cost of deliveries to those areas for parcels. But clearly, we've got to make sure that the service remains for them for the letters and correspondence as well as with that, through that universal service obligation. The past year and a half has presented exceptional challenges, led to the disruption of services, but the postal system has continued to operate, and Royal Mail is able to resume service levels now that now that absence levels are closer to normal and the business adjusts to operational changes. So I'd like to thank once again on behalf of the government to thank all of the Royal Mail postal workers and the Royal Mail itself for the dedication and commitment shown whilst providing continued service throughout the pandemic. Thank you, Ms McDonough.
David Johnson to wind up.
Thank you very much, Ms McDonough. And I'm grateful to everybody who's taken part in this debate this afternoon. I think it's been a good debate. I think the member for Dulwich and West Norwood spoke for all of us when she said that we owe our postal workers a huge debt of gratitude for all the work they've done during this period. And I think she was quite right, though, to say there's a difference between pausing deliveries on Saturdays and not delivering anything for weeks at a time, which has been the experience in Wantage and Didcot at all. I would support her request for postcode level data on deliveries. I think the member for Hornsey and Wood Green detailed very well the impacts of these delays, the sorts of things that have been delayed, from shielding letters to vaccination letters. I thought it was a very good idea that actually Royal Mail could create some more apprenticeship positions and support young people as well as thereby improving their service. I'm grateful to the SNP spokesperson, the member for Aberdeen South. He and I don't agree on the number of British institutions that are worthy of high regard, and I'm sure that's no surprise. We also don't agree on the privatisation, because there's some public services I could be complaining about today as well. But where I do agree with him is if Royal Mail's priorities have changed to parcels, it's important that they're honest about that, because that's what my constituents feel they can see, but it's not something that Royal Mail is admitted to. I'm also grateful to the opposition spokesperson and member for Newcastle upon Tyne Central. I think she was exactly right about the important role that Royal Mail had played in the pandemic of delivering PPE and so on, but also, which is a point I don't think any of the rest of us made, that they were often the only human contact that people who were shielding were having, and she reminded me that actually people had hugely appreciated that, because it was often the only conversation that they were having with everybody during that period. I'm very grateful to the Minister for engaging with this seriously, for understanding the distress that this is causing, and for providing the data that he did. He's quite right to say that Royal Mail did do some Sunday services, which shocked constituents to be getting post on a Sunday. So I do think they were trying. He's provided important delivery round data as well. But I think one of his most important points was when he said that actually fewer people are relying on this service, but for those that are, it's incredibly important. And that debate is the same when it comes to the use of cheques or the use of cash or people who don't have smartphones. That we forget sometimes. We think there's a relentless progress of technology. Actually, it can leave people very vulnerable, and I think people not receiving the things that they haven't been receiving has been very, very difficult for them. He's quite right to say that tomorrow I'm visiting one of the service centres, so I'll be able to get under the skin of this. Royal Mail have told me they've hired more staff, they've bought more vehicles. So the test will be, does it get better this year? Because if it doesn't, I'll be back on the Minister's case. I'll be back on Royal Mail's case, because I do think it's important that constituents get the service they're paying for. And thank you very much to you, Ms McDonough, for chairing this debate.
The question is that this House has considered the performance of Royal Mail. As many of that are opinions say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting stands adjourned.